He lost his only son to a zombie bite after the end of the world. Hello all. This is Jacobson and this is a brief retelling of the 9th and 10th episodes of the 8th season of the zombie series The Walking Dead. You can see the previous episodes at the links in the video description. As soon as this video gets 300 likes, I will release the next part. Enjoy watching it.
Rick and Michonne dig a grave in Alexandria. In the flashback, Carl and Siddiq fight with walkers in the forest. Carl is caught off guard and gets bitten in the stomach. He leads Siddiq into a sewer manhole outside Alexandria and explains that he has to talk to Rick before bringing Siddiq into their community. Carl seals the bite wound in the bathroom and puts on a clean shirt. Tobin gives Carl a note from Michonne and explains that she went to the shelter. Carl writes letters to Rick, Michonne and other members of the group. Then he plays with Judith on the porch of their house in Alexandria. Back in the present, Morgan watches as the rescuers shoot at the walkers surrounding the shelters, creating a passage behind the piles of corpses. The rescuers escape and start shooting at Morgan and 3 other snipers. While the snipers are killed, Morgan dodges their fire and walks away unharmed. Gavin leads the caravan of saviors along the road, and Morgan follows them on foot. In the woods, Carol speaks to Billy and the surviving members of the kingdom to seek refuge in her cottage while she rescues Ezekiel. She does not allow Henry to accompany her, despite the fact that he insists on fighting the saviors. In the sewer, Carl shows Rick his bite wound and gives him a bundle of letters that he wrote to the group. He explains that the saviors are not to blame for his bite and that it happened when he was helping Siddiq. Gavin guards Ezekiel after attacking the kingdom. And Ezekiel urges Gavin to go over to Rick's side before it's too late for him. Morgan stealthily enters the captured kingdom and sees Henry prowling in the distance. Carol joins Morgan inside the walls of the kingdom. Morgan's plan of attack involves killing all the saviors, but Carol suggests avoiding them. In the sewer, Siddiq gives Carl medicine and explains that he was a medical resident. Rosita suggests they all escape to Hilltop while the saviors destroy Alexandria. Dwight points out that the saviors will soon run out of ammo, and insists that they remain in place until the end of the siege. Carol and Morgan kill a group of 4 rescuers who are trying to put out the fire. Carol witnesses Morgan's brutality and worries about his new bloodlust. Carl urges Rick and Michonne to stop fighting the saviors. They hear the silence above the ground. Daryl and Tobin return to confirm that the saviors have indeed left Alexandria. Morgan notices that the rescuers are loading the truck and decides to kill them, despite Carol's protest. Gavin tries to contact 3 of his people by radio, but gets no response. He hears gunshots in the distance and retreats into the hall with Ezekiel and his remaining men. Rick and Michonne are shoveling dirt on the grave. Rick insists on staying in Alexandria with Carl while the rest of the group goes to Hilltop. Daryl takes Judith away so Michonne can stay with Rick and Carl. Carl says an emotional goodbye to Judith, telling her that sometimes children have to show their parents the way, and gives her his sheriff's hat. Siddiq vows to honor Carl's memory by showing everyone that his choice to save him mattered. Carol and Morgan ambush the saviors in the hall. Gavin is injured during the scuffle, but he manages to escape. Morgan is chasing him. Rick asks Michonne to help him carry Carl out of the sewer and take him to the church. Morgan finds Gavin hiding in the barn. Rick and Michonne put Carl to bed in the church. Carl is remorseful for killing the boy when they were living in prison. Morgan pushes Gavin to the ground, and Gavin begs Morgan to spare his life and insists that Rick's group will not be able to defeat Negan. Rick tries to absolve Carl of the blame for the boy's death. Carl points out how easy it was to kill another person. Gavin tells Morgan that killing him won't change anything, and Morgan lifts Gavin to his feet. Carl explains that Rick's decision to stop fighting and accept survivors into prison played an important role in his formation. And Ezekiel urges Morgan to let Gavin live. Rick reminds Carl that the war against the saviors is different from their situation in prison, but Carl is convinced that they shouldn't kill all the saviors. Carol urges Morgan to spare Gavin's life. Morgan is shocked and crying. Morgan is surprised when a fighting stick pierces Gavin's throat from behind. When Gavin falls, it turns out that Henry was the killer. Carl describes his vision of a peaceful future in which an aged white-bearded Rick lives with Judith in prosperous Alexandria. Rick promises to bring Carl's vision to life. Ezekiel calms Henry down and tells him not to look at Gavin's body. Carol scolds Henry for disobedience, but also assures Henry that everything will work out. Carl pulls out a gun and insists on shooting himself before he dies. He tells Rick and Michonne that he loves them. Rick and Michonne are waiting outside the church, where they hear a single suppressed shot. They bury Carl's body in the cemetery in Alexandria. In Carl's vision, Judith walks down the garden path in Alexandria and greets Negan, who is working with other members of the community. In the future, the light is dancing on Rick's face again, who is sitting under a tree in a large open field and crying with blood on his hand. Two stained glass windows in wooden frames hang on the branches of the tree, which create a rainbow reflection on his face. Michonne and Rick continue to mourn Carl. While Michonne watches the destruction inflicted on the city, she deals with several walkers. She notices that more walkers are making their way to an open section of the wall and tries to seal it, but to no avail. The face finds the dead savior and takes his walkie-talkie. Both return to their house, and Michonne notices two handprints painted in blue paint on the porch. Carl and Judith. She begins to show emotion by touching Carl's fingerprint, but then is forced to retreat into the house at the sight of approaching walkers. As the two prepare to leave the shelter in a van, Michonne notices that one of the gazebos is on fire and says that Carl used to sit on the roof. She and Rig take fire extinguishers and try to stop the fire, but are forced to escape from the onslaught of walkers and leave the burning building. They drive out of Alexandria and Michonne and once again looks at the sign hanging at the gate. Michonne offers to stop to read Carl's letters, but Rick refuses, still grieving. To his surprise, Michonne finds a letter addressed to Negan. Rick reveals his plan to talk to Jedis and persuade her to fight, knowing that since she and the scavengers were spotted following Rick to the shelter, they themselves have become targets. They stay in the landfill, but find themselves locked inside after the trap is triggered, resulting in a large pile of garbage falling and sealing the door. Michonne and Rick frantically dig through a pile of garbage, while the revived corpses of scavengers begin to flock to them. Negan tells Simon about the situation that has developed in Alexandria, impressed by Carl's efforts to help the residents. He asks Simon about what he did to the traveling residents of the hilltop. Simon reports that the situation has been resolved and asks about Gavin's band, which none of them have heard anything about. Negan sits Simon down and instructs him to deal with the scavengers. At first, Simon is thrilled at the thought of destroying his traitors, but Negan stops him, reminding him that they are still a valuable resource. He orders Simon to deliver only the standard message "kill one, spare the others," as a reminder that their former union is a deal that has become final. Simon claims that their methods don't work because Alexandria, Hilltop, the kingdom and the scavengers don't seem to understand how serious the saviors are. In this regard, he suggests that they reduce losses and find other communities that will join their cause, instead of bringing Rick's people to submission. Negan, unhappy with this idea, counters that although their current methods are difficult, they are still effective. He confirms his confidence that as soon as Rick is destroyed, everything will return to service. Before the conversation can continue, the rescuers bring in a coffin-sized box and place it on the table. Negan and Simon open the box and discover a zombified Dean, who is quickly put to sleep. Enraged, Simon realizes that the remaining 38 saviors mentioned on the lid of the box are those who were at the satellite outpost. He becomes enraged and vows to destroy the Hilltop colony, but Negan angrily stops him. At Netania's house, both Nit and Aaron are handcuffed. And the insiders decide to leave the decision on what to do with the two Alexandrians to Cindy's discretion, which, after some persuasion, and Nit decides to let them live. After taking them to the forest, Cindy refuses to join the fight, believing that what they have already done is enough. She warns them never to return to the community. Aaron insists on staying in Oceanside despite their warning and unwillingness to fight to try to convince the community to join their forces. He believes he has a chance to successfully enlist their help thanks to Katie and Beatrice showing interest during a previous visit. He orders Enid to return to the hilltop and inform Maggie of his plans, but asks her not to come back for him. Enid, having no doubt that Oceanside has decided everything, allows Aaron to continue implementing his plan and leaves for Hilltop. Simon is gathering his people for a trip to the landfill. Scavengers greet their arrival with extreme caution, weapons ready. Simon demands an apology from Jedi's for her presence with Rick in the shelter. Jedi's claims that she brought Rick to the Saviors as an offering, but an exasperated Simon rejects this. He explains that Negan is ready to forget about any actions against the Scavengers if they side with him and fulfill a previously concluded deal, but stresses that they will need all their weapons. Tamil objects that weapons are necessary in case of problems in the future, but Simon replies that they don't have to worry about anything when they are being looked after by the rescuers. Scavengers are reluctant to get rid of weapons, and Simon questions their choice of lifestyle and housing. Jedi's asks if their problems have been solved, but Simon still insists that Jedi's apologize for her misdeeds, believing that there is no remorse in their deal. Jedi's makes a half-serious apology, resulting in Simon shooting Brian in the chest. Alarmed, Jedi's repeats her words with apparent sincerity, but still unconvinced, Simon shoots Tamil, killing her. Frustrated, Jedi slaps Simon in the face, knocking him to the ground and spilling paint on his shoe, insisting that remorse is evident. Simon, rejecting her apology, gives the order to kill the entire crowd, except for Jedi's, and the rescuers open fire on the Scavengers in front of their leader. Back at the shelter, Simon and Negan discuss the fact that Gavin has not returned yet, not knowing that he is dead. When asked by Negan about the Scavengers, Simon reports that his mission was successful, lying that he transmitted a standard message and adding that there was remorse. A DJ calls Negan and informs him that Rick is calling him on the Savior's two-way radio. When Negan leaves, Simon examines the paint stain on his shoe. Rick and Michonne fight zombie scavengers until they are forced to climb a mountain of garbage. At the top they find Jedi's, dressed in mourning and speaking pure English. When asked how to get out, Jedi's simply directs them back to where they came from. Jedi's confides in them about the time of the apocalypse when she visited the landfill in search of materials for crafts, as well as how her community created a home and a quiet life out of what used to be a sea of garbage. Rick, however, blames her for the current fate of her people. Rick grabs the discarded car door and makes a shield out of it. Jedi's insists on joining them, but Rick refuses her, deciding that he no longer needs her. Rick and Michonne fight their way through the advancing walkers, covering several with shields, but then resort to weapons again. They manage to remove enough debris to open the exit. Jedi's is almost catching up with them, desperately looking for a way out. Rick points the revolver in her direction, then raises his hand up and shoots, driving her away. Jedi's manages to escape from the herd when they try to overtake her. Rick sees her running down a separate alley and then walking away. Confused, Jedi's begins to knock with the staff, and the upper part of the large mechanism, attracting the attention of the undead scavengers. When they get closer, she activates the machine she is standing on, and it turns out to be a large grinding machine. Jedi's unhooks the chain separating the walkers from the metal teeth and watches as everyone falls and turns into dust. She watches with sadness as the zombified Brian and Tamil also fall into the meat grinder. After turning off the machine, Jedi stumbles upon a hidden drawer filled with cans of applesauce, from which she begins to eat. On the way to Hilltop, Rick explains to Michonne that his intention was not to kill Jedi's, but rather to drive her away. Michonne draws analogies with Carl's words before his death. Rick stops the van on the side of the road to take a break and collect his thoughts. He picks up Carl's letters and the walkie-talkie, then gets out of the car and heads into an open field. Taking the letters, he highlights his own and Negan's letter, but reads only Negan's letter. After a pause, he contacts the shelter and asks to call Negan. Hearing his voice on the other end, Rick announces the death of his son, which is very shocking and upsetting to Negan. He reveals the contents of their letters. Carl wants them both to stop the war and make peace. Rick, however, believes that peace is now impossible. Negan asks if Carl's death was the work of the Saviors, but Rick angrily denies it, explaining that he died trying to help someone. Negan sincerely repents, saying that Carl personified their future, but also repeats that Carl died because Rick, having led a rebellion against the Saviors, was not present to keep Carl.